I overheard my husband and my daughter planning to have me declared mentally incompetent so they could take my company. I'm still trying to understand how something so clinical, so carefully phrased, could feel like such a personal execution. My hands were shaking, but my mind was terrifyingly clear. It was like a switch flipped inside me. Survival mode. No panic, just awareness. I'm 57 years old. I built a commercial refrigeration company from the ground up, literally out of a garage, 28 years ago. I grew it slowly, deliberately. 12 million in annual revenue, 45 employees who trust me with their livelihoods. I didn't inherit this life, I earned it. Until last Tuesday, I thought my marriage was solid in the way long marriages usually are. Not romantic, not perfect, but stable. My husband stayed home after we married. He raised our 2 kids, managed the house. That was our arrangement. I worked. He handled everything else. I never questioned his spending. I never counted receipts. I believe we were a team. That belief shattered around 2 in the afternoon. A supplier meeting got canceled, so I came home early. I pulled into the driveway and noticed an unfamiliar BMW parked where my husband usually leaves space for deliveries. I assumed he had a friend over. I didn't text. I didn't call out. I walked in through the garage. I heard voices coming from my home office. The door wasn't fully closed, just enough to let sound spill into the hallway. I slowed without realizing it. My breath caught when I recognized my daughter's voice. "So realistically," she said, "how long does the whole process take?" A man I didn't recognize answered, calm and professional. "If we can establish a pattern of concerning behavior, maybe 3 to 4 months. The key is documentation." My husband spoke next, casual, practiced. "She's been forgetting things, repeating herself. Last week, she couldn't remember our neighbor's name." I stood there frozen, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. They weren't whispering. They weren't arguing. They were planning. They were talking about me like I wasn't a person anymore, just a problem to manage. Doctors, missed appointments, erratic business decisions, conservatorship. They weren't worried about my health. They were laying the groundwork to take my company, my money, my autonomy, by convincing the law that I couldn't be trusted with my own mind. And in that quiet hallway, listening to my family dismantle my life with polite voices and legal language, I understood something with absolute clarity. My marriage didn't end in a fight. It ended the moment they decided I was something to be removed. When people hear that I built a company from nothing, they imagine some dramatic origin story, overnight success, bold risks, lucky breaks. The truth is far less cinematic. It was slow, quiet, lonely in ways I didn't understand until much later. I was 29 when I started the business, newly married, tired in that bone-deep way that comes from working too hard and believing it will eventually pay off. I had just left a stable job because I couldn't stand the idea of asking permission for decisions I already knew were right. I wanted something that was mine, something solid. My husband supported the idea, at least verbally. He liked telling people he was married to a business owner. He liked the idea of ambition, as long as it didn't disrupt his sense of comfort. The first years were brutal. I worked out of a garage with one aging van and tools I couldn't afford to replace. I did installations during the day and paperwork at night. My hands were always cut, always sore. I came home smelling like metal and grease, collapsing into bed while my husband talked about the kids' schedules or what needed fixing around the house. We told ourselves this was balance. When the business started growing, the roles hardened. I worked more. He stayed home more. He managed the house, raised our 2 kids, handled school meetings and doctor appointments. From the outside, it looked like a modern arrangement flipped on its head. From the inside, it felt functional, efficient. I provided, he maintained. I didn't question it. Not when the company hit its first million. Not when we hired our 10th employee. Not when we moved into a bigger house or joined a country club I barely had time to enjoy. I believed contribution came in different forms, and that mine just happened to be financial. Our daughter grew up sharp, observant, ambitious. She asked questions early, about money, about power, about who made decisions. I was proud of her curiosity. When she left for college, I missed her more than I expected. Our son came later into the business, 32 years old. Business school. Experience elsewhere first. His choice, not mine. When he finally joined as operations manager, I was proud in a way that surprised me. I told myself this wasn't nepotism. He earned the role. He understood systems. He spoke confidently in meetings. I ignored the small discomfort when he started pushing deals that felt wrong. I brushed off the way my husband began asking more questions about the company, valuation, ownership, succession. I thought it was interest. I thought it was concern about the future. Looking back now, I can see the shift. The way conversation slowly stopped being about us and started orbiting around what I had built. The way my value in the family subtly changed, from partner to provider. At the time, though, it just felt like life. Long marriages don't implode loudly, they erode quietly. And I had no idea that while I was building something meant to outlast me, the people closest to me were already planning what came after me. The first signs weren't dramatic. They never are. If betrayal announced itself clearly, no one would ever miss it. It started with questions, not curiosity, interrogation dressed up as concern. My husband began asking about the company in a way he never had before. Not the day-to-day stuff, not how a project went, or whether a client was difficult. He asked about ownership structures, about what would happen if something happened to me, about whether the business was technically marital property. At first I answered casually. I didn't hear alarm bells. We'd been married for decades. Why wouldn't I be transparent? Then the questions repeated, circled back, tightened. So if you got sick, he said one night, standing in the kitchen, arms folded, who would be legally allowed to make decisions? I remember pausing, the weight of the question settling somewhere behind my ribs. I would, I said slowly. I'm the owner, the sole decision maker. He nodded, but something in his eyes didn't relax. Around the same time, my daughter started calling more often. At first it felt comforting. She asked how I was sleeping, whether I was tired, whether work felt stressful. You've been pushing yourself a lot, she said once. Don't you think? I laughed it off. I'd always pushed myself. That was nothing new. But then she started correcting me. Tiny things. Finishing my sentences. Reminding me of conversations I didn't remember having. Mentioning details I was certain we'd never discussed. You already told me that, she said one afternoon lightly. Too lightly. I checked my calendar afterward. No record. No call. At work, my son became more aggressive. He pushed for contracts that felt wrong. Clients with bad reputations, thin margins, legal gray areas. When I vetoed them, he bristled. You're being overly cautious, he said during one meeting. This is how we grow. No, I replied. This is how we bleed. He started documenting everything. Decisions, disagreements, my tone in meetings. I noticed him taking notes when I spoke, glancing at me in a way that felt evaluative. When I asked him about it, he smiled, just keeping things organized. At home, the atmosphere shifted. Conversations stopped flowing. They felt staged, monitored. I'd walk into a room and feel the energy change, like I'd interrupted something that wasn't meant for me. Once, I misplaced my keys, found them an hour later exactly where I'd already looked. Another time my husband commented, "You've been more irritable lately." I stared at him, stunned. "I'm reacting to pressure," I said. "That's not the same thing." He shrugged. "I'm just saying what I see." That's when it hit me, not as a conclusion, but as a sensation. I felt watched, evaluated, measured against some invisible standard I didn't agree to. And still, I told myself I was being paranoid, that long marriages breed miscommunication, that children grow into their own opinions. That stress can make everything feel sharper than it is. I didn't want to believe that concern could be rehearsed. I didn't want to believe that love could quietly turn into strategy. But by then, the seed had already been planted, and it was growing fast. The day everything broke open didn't feel dramatic at first. It felt ordinary in the most dangerous way, routine enough to lower my guard. A supplier meeting on the other side of town was canceled at the last minute. I was already in my car, already halfway there when my phone buzzed. I checked the message, turned around, and decided to go home. It was early afternoon, no traffic, no urgency. I pulled into the driveway a little after 2. That's when I saw the BMW. Dark, clean, expensive. Parked just far enough to the side that it didn't block the garage, like whoever drove it knew the habits of the house. I remember thinking my husband must have a friend over, maybe a consultant, maybe someone from church. It didn't feel threatening yet. I walked in through the garage, the door clicking shut behind me. The house was quiet, but not empty. Voices drifted from my home office. That room had always been off limits to everyone but me. It held contracts, financial records, old notebooks from when the company was still an idea, scribbled in the margins of late nights. Hearing anyone else in there made my chest tighten before my brain caught up. The door wasn't fully closed, not locked, just careless. I stepped closer. My daughter's voice came first. So realistically, how long does the whole process take? I stopped. A man I didn't recognize answered. His voice was smooth, practiced, the tone of someone who explains complicated things for a living. If we can establish a pattern of concerning behavior, he said, 3 to 4 months. The key is documentation. My husband spoke next, and that was the moment the air left my lungs. She's been forgetting things, repeating herself. Last week, she couldn't remember our neighbor's name. I stood in the hallway, frozen, my heart pounding so hard I was afraid they'd hear it through the walls. The man responded without hesitation. That's good. We'll need more examples. Missed appointments, erratic business decisions, anything that suggests declining capacity. My daughter jumped in, almost eager. She vetoed the Riverside contract last month. It made no sense financially. I clenched my jaw. The Riverside contract was a low-ball offer from a client notorious for late payments and legal disputes. I'd rejected it because experience had taught me what desperation looks like when it comes dressed as opportunity. But here they were, rewriting it as evidence. What about her temper? My husband asked. She's been more irritable lately. I felt a sharp, bitter laugh rise in my throat and forced it down. Of course I was irritable. I was running a company while being quietly undermined in my own home. The man hummed approvingly. Perfect. Keep detailed notes. Dates, times, witnesses if possible. Once she's declared incompetent, conservatorship would transfer business control to the next logical party. And that would be me, my daughter said. Yes, the man replied. As her child and operations manager, you'd be the obvious choice. Your husband would handle personal assets and daily affairs. How much is your retainer? My husband asked. $25,000 to start, the man said calmly. Given the valuation of the business, it's a worthwhile investment. That was the moment my shock turned into something colder. They weren't discussing possibilities. They were planning execution. I opened the door and stepped inside. The lawyer, slick hair, expensive suit, went pale. My husband jumped like he'd been caught stealing. My daughter at least had the decency to look sick. Meeting going well? I asked, my voice steady in a way that surprised even me. No one answered. And just like that, the quiet conspiracy collapsed into daylight. For a few seconds, no one moved. The air in the room felt thick, like the moment before a storm breaks. I could hear my own heartbeat, slow, deliberate, louder than it should have been. My hands weren't shaking anymore. That scared me more than if they had. The lawyer was the first to react. He snapped his briefcase shut with a nervous click, papers bending at the corners as he shoved them inside. He didn't look at me when he stood, just angled his body toward the door like proximity alone might save him. I think this consultation is over, he muttered. Don't bother, I said. My voice came out calm, flat. You're not getting that retainer. My husband recovered quickly. He always did. That was one of the things I'd admired about him once, how fast he could pivot, how smoothly he could talk his way out of discomfort. This isn't what it looks like, he said, hands raised slightly, like he was soothing a nervous animal. We're just concerned. It's exactly what it looks like, I replied. You're trying to have me declared mentally incompetent so you can take my company. My daughter swallowed hard. Mom, we were worried about you. You've been acting different. Save it, I said. I heard everything, every word. The lawyer edged toward the door again. I stepped forward and blocked it. Sit down, I said. You're going to explain the legal requirements for a competency evaluation. His eyes flicked to my husband, then back to me. I really need to be going. Sit, I said, my voice sharpening. Or I call the state bar right now and report you for conspiring with family members to commit elder fraud. That did it. He sat. He explained it clinically, like he'd done this 100 times before, how family members could petition the court, how doctors evaluated capacity, how it was all framed as protection, as care. And how much of this have you already filed? I asked. Nothing, he said quickly. This was just a consultation. Good, I said. Get out, all of you, now. The lawyer didn't wait to be told twice. He practically ran. My daughter hesitated, her mouth opening like she wanted to say something. Maybe an apology, maybe another excuse. I pointed at the door. Go. She left. My husband stayed. He started crying then, real tears. Loud, messy, convincing. He reached for me, and I stepped back. You're not thinking clearly, he said. We're trying to help you. You're trying to rob me, I replied. Get out. When he finally left, the house felt hollow. I locked myself in the office and started making calls. First, my personal doctor. I told him everything and asked for an emergency cognitive assessment. He was furious on my behalf and fit me in that same afternoon. Second, my CPA. I warned him things were about to get ugly and asked him to prepare full documentation of every business and personal financial record. Third, a divorce attorney a friend had recommended. I left a message. Fourth, my corporate attorney. I asked about immediate steps to protect the company. The cognitive assessment took 2 hours. Memory tests, problem solving, questionnaires. My doctor had known me for 15 years. When I explained why I was there, his jaw tightened. Your mind is sharp as ever, he said. I'll have a written report by tomorrow documenting full cognitive capacity. When I got home that evening, my husband and daughter were waiting in the living room, red-eyed, quiet. We need to talk rationally, my husband said. Agreed, I replied. Here's rational. I told them I had witnesses, that I'd recorded the conversation. That was a lie, but they didn't know that. My daughter went pale. Tomorrow morning, I said, turning to her, you're fired. Clean out your desk by 9 or security will escort you out. Mom, please, she said, I need that job. You should have thought about that before trying to steal my company. My husband started shouting about wrongful termination. I explained at-will employment and disloyalty. Then I packed a bag and left. That night, alone in a hotel room, I stared at the ceiling, replaying everything. 26 years of marriage. And this was how it ended. I didn't sleep that night. I lay on the stiff hotel mattress, staring at the ceiling, replaying every sentence I'd overheard like my mind was trying to carve it into something permanent. The tone, the ease, the way they talked about me as if I were already gone. 26 years of marriage, 2 children, decades of trust, reduced to bullet points and legal strategy. By morning, shock had burned off and left something sharper in its place. Resolve. I was at the office before sunrise. 6 a.m., the building still dark, the hum of refrigeration units echoing faintly through the space I'd built from nothing. My corporate attorney and HR director met me in the conference room. I laid everything out, every word, every plan, every betrayal. I handed over documentation, timelines, notes I'd written the night before when my hands finally stopped shaking. They were stunned, not just angry, offended. This wasn't family drama. This was an attempted corporate coup. At 8:30, my daughter arrived. She tried to walk past security like nothing had changed. Her badge didn't work. She called me. I didn't answer. Security handed her a cardboard box and supervised while she cleaned out her desk. She tried to access her work computer. It had already locked her out. When security caught her attempting to download files onto a USB drive, they confiscated it. Inside were client lists, supplier contacts, operational manuals, financial projections. She hadn't just expected to get fired. She'd planned to compete. By noon, my corporate attorney had issued a cease and desist. The non-compete clause in her employment contract, one she'd signed 6 years earlier without reading carefully, was airtight. While all this was happening, my husband was blowing up my phone. I counted 89 calls and messages that first day. You're destroying our family. How could you do this to your own child? I'll take you for everything in the divorce. My divorce attorney's response was brief and devastating. Your client conspired to have my client declared mentally incompetent, she wrote. That constitutes elder abuse in this state. I suggest you reconsider your tone. Silence followed, 12 full hours of it. Then the financial warfare began. On day 3, my husband maxed out every credit card I'd ever given him. Over $45,000 in a single afternoon. Jewelry, electronics, designer items I didn't even recognize. I took screenshots of everything before calling the card companies. The cards were canceled within the hour. He also drained our joint checking account, $10,000 we kept for household expenses. Gone. Transferred into his personal account. What he didn't realize was that it was the only joint account we had. Everything else, business accounts, investments, primary checking, had always been in my name alone. Day 4, his attorney sent a demand letter. $15,000 a month in temporary spousal support. Exclusive use of the marital home. Mortgage paid by me while he stayed there. My attorney laughed. Actually laughed. Then she sent back a response listing the conspiracy, the credit card fraud, the asset dissipation, and offered $3,000 a month, suggesting he find employment. Day 5, my phone rang. It was my son. He lived 2 states away, worked as a physical therapist. His voice was tight with confusion. "Mom, what's going on? Dad says you've lost your mind." I told him everything, sent him the cognitive assessment results. There was a long pause on the line. "I knew something was wrong," he said finally. "He's been asking weird questions about your will, about the company." Relief flooded his voice. He believed me. But the damage was already spreading, and the people who tried to take everything from me weren't done yet. The house was silent the night everything finally caught up to me. Not the dramatic kind of silence, the kind that presses in on your ears until you start hearing your own thoughts too clearly. I was alone in my apartment, boxes still unpacked, the unfamiliar creak of floors reminding me I didn't belong there yet. That was when the doubt crept in. Not about what they'd done, about me. I sat at the small kitchen table with the cognitive assessment report spread out in front of me, reading the same lines over and over again. No signs of impairment, fully intact executive function, sharp memory and judgment. On paper, it was undeniable. And yet, I kept thinking, what if I hadn't walked in that day? What if I'd stayed at the meeting? What if I'd heard about this months later, through a judge, through paperwork, through someone else explaining my own life to me? That was the darkest part. Not the betrayal, not the money. The realization that they'd almost convinced me I couldn't trust my own mind. I remembered moments from the past few months that suddenly felt tainted. My husband correcting me casually, my daughter insisting I'd already said things I knew I hadn't. The subtle looks exchanged when I disagreed with them. Gaslighting doesn't feel like manipulation when it's done slowly. It feels like aging, like stress, like you're the problem. I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping against the floor, heart racing. My reflection stared back at me from the dark window, older than I felt, sharper than I looked. I pressed my palm against the glass, grounding myself. "You're not crazy," I told myself. "They tried to make you believe you were." That night, the calls started again. My husband, over and over. When I didn't answer, he left voicemails, crying, accusing, begging, threatening. Then came messages from people I hadn't spoken to in years. Friends from the country club, distant relatives, a former neighbor. They were all worried. He'd been telling them I'd had a breakdown, that I'd turned on my family without reason, that I wasn't myself anymore. I turned off my phone and sat on the floor with my back against the couch, knees pulled to my chest, breathing slowly until my pulse settled. This was the point they wanted me to break. If I lost my composure, they'd win. If I lashed out, they'd have proof. If I doubted myself, they'd already succeeded. But instead of collapsing, something else happened. The grief arrived. Not explosive, not dramatic, just heavy. I mourned the marriage I thought I had, the family I believed in, the version of myself who trusted too easily because she believed loyalty was mutual. That night, I cried quietly, not for what I'd lost, but for how close I'd come to losing everything. And when the sun came up the next morning, my sadness hardened into something steadier. Clarity. They had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, and I was done reacting. 3 weeks later, I realized something unsettling. They weren't backing down. If anything, the entitlement had grown sharper, more desperate, more reckless, like animals thrashing after realizing the trap had already closed. My divorce attorney filed the paperwork. My husband was formally served. Within days, he hired the most aggressive lawyer he could find, the kind with billboards and slogans about fighting for what you deserve. His first move was exactly what my attorney predicted, an emergency motion. Exclusive use of the marital home. $20,000 a month in temporary spousal support. The argument? I had abandoned my husband. He needed to maintain his standard of living. My attorney's response brief was 30 pages long. It laid everything out in cold, unflinching detail. The conspiracy to have me declared mentally incompetent, the financial misconduct, the credit card fraud, the asset dissipation. Attached were my doctor's cognitive assessment, the cease and desist sent to my daughter, sworn statements from my CPA. The hearing was a disaster for them. My husband arrived dressed in black, looking fragile, subdued. His attorney leaned hard into the abandonment narrative. The judge barely let him finish. "Counselor," she said, peering over her glasses, "your client conspired to have his spouse declared mentally incompetent. Why would she remain in that home?" His attorney stumbled. "Those allegations are disputed." "Are they?" the judge asked calmly. "Because I have a signed statement from the attorney present at that meeting." That was the moment my husband's face drained of color. The lawyer they'd hired for the conservatorship, terrified after my corporate attorney threatened bar complaints, had given a voluntary statement to protect himself. He confirmed everything. The judge denied the emergency motion. Temporary support was set at $4,000 a month, barely enough to cover the mortgage and utilities. No exclusive use of the house. A 50-50 split of household items, with me getting first choice since I'd moved out. My husband lost it. He started shouting in the courtroom, voice cracking, insisting he couldn't survive on that amount, that I was trying to make him homeless. The judge didn't flinch. "Sir," she said, "your spouse alleges elder abuse. The court is being generous. I suggest you accept this order and obtain counsel who will give you realistic expectations." Outside the courthouse, he tried to approach me. My attorney stepped in front of him. "You're destroying me," he said, tears streaming. "I gave you the best years of my life." "You tried to have me declared insane," I replied quietly. "We're done." But the real turning point came after. My daughter, desperate, reckless, started calling my business clients, telling them I was having health issues, and offering herself as a consultant who knew the systems. 3 clients called me directly. I thanked them, forwarded everything to my corporate attorney. Cease and desist letters went out. Lawsuits were threatened for tortious interference. Then she made her biggest mistake. She tried to start her own competing business, filed the LLC paperwork, gave it a polished name like nothing had happened. She forgot one thing, her non-compete clause. Within 2 weeks, we were in court again, this time for a temporary restraining order and preliminary injunction. The judge granted it in full. She was barred from operating any competing business, contacting my clients or employees, or working in commercial refrigeration within 100 miles. Violation meant contempt of court. When my daughter stood up and shouted that it wasn't fair, that she had bills to pay, the judge shut her down instantly. "You signed a contract," she said, "and given your conduct, this court finds you acted in bad faith." That was the moment the power shifted. Not emotionally, legally. They no longer controlled the narrative. I did. Once the injunction was in place, I thought the chaos might finally slow down. I was wrong. When people lose leverage, they don't become reasonable. They become louder. My husband shifted tactics almost immediately. If he couldn't win in court, he'd try to win in public. He started calling anyone who would listen. My sister, my elderly mother, distant relatives, even old friends I hadn't spoken to in years. He told them I was having a breakdown, that I'd turned on my family, that I wasn't myself anymore. My sister called me laughing. "He tried to tell me you've lost it," she said. "I told him you're the sanest person I know and that he should get help." My mother wasn't laughing. She's 82. She doesn't need manufactured crises. When she called me crying, confused and frightened, something inside me hardened all over again. I drove to her house that afternoon, sat with her at the kitchen table, showed her the cognitive assessment, explained everything slowly, carefully. She listened in silence, her mouth pressed into a thin line. "I never liked him," she said finally, too concerned with appearances. "But I thought he loved you." "He loved what I provided," I replied. She hugged me then, tight and fierce. "You'll get through this." But my husband kept pushing. He went to my country club and started spreading rumors, subtle ones, that I was going through something, that people should be patient with me. 2 members called to check in. I resigned my membership the same day. I wasn't giving him the satisfaction of watching my reputation rot in small, polite circles. Then he tried something even riskier. He called my bank, claiming to be my authorized representative, asking to verify transactions on my business accounts. The bank called me immediately. I confirmed he had 0 authority and asked them to flag his number permanently. Meanwhile, the injunction against my daughter only made her more reckless. 2 weeks after the hearing, she violated it. She took a consulting job with a competing refrigeration company 80 miles away, convinced she was outside the restricted radius. She wasn't. My corporate attorney found out within days. Emails, text messages, social media posts where she'd bragged about the new role. We filed contempt charges. The hearing was short. The judge was not amused. "You signed an agreement," she said sharply. "You were warned." My daughter tried to argue financial hardship, that she had bills, that I'd cut her off. "Your financial situation," the judge replied, "is a direct consequence of your own choices." She was held in contempt. $500 per day until she ceased all work with the competing company, $15,000 in attorney's fees payable to me. She quit the next day. Around that time, discovery in the divorce unearthed the final layer of betrayal. My husband had been hiding money. A separate bank account I'd never known about. $83,000 skimmed slowly over the years from household funds. He claimed it was his savings. Couldn't explain the source. The judge didn't buy it. Even worse, the credit card cash advances, over $25,000, had no paper trail at all. This wasn't panic spending. It was preparation. By the time everything surfaced, the narrative they'd tried to build collapsed completely. They weren't victims. They were drowning, and they'd tried to pull me under with them. 2 months later, it was over. Not in a cinematic way. No slammed doors, no final speeches, just paperwork, signatures, and the quiet thud of a life being officially closed. The divorce settlement was finalized 3 weeks after the last hearing. It wasn't generous, but it was fair, given everything. The judge made that very clear. My husband received 35% of the equity in the house. We're selling it. Neither of us will live there again. He kept one car, the older Honda, his personal belongings, and $3,500 a month in spousal support for exactly 4 years. The judge called it rehabilitative, not permanent. Time to rebuild, not a reward. One retirement account we designated as joint was split, about $90,000. That was it. I kept the business, 100%. It was never marital property, and the court didn't entertain arguments otherwise. I kept my investments, my accounts, my car, 65% of the house equity, and the vacation cabin I'd bought before we married. The hidden bank account he'd tried to keep secret, the judge ruled it marital property, split evenly. The credit card debt he'd racked up after the confrontation, all his. He cried in court, told the judge he'd given up his career for our family, that I was leaving him destitute. The judge wasn't moved. 4 years of support is ample time to obtain employment or education, she said, and your conduct during this proceeding, financial fraud, asset concealment, and a conspiracy to declare your spouse mentally incompetent, does not warrant this court's sympathy. That was the end of it. My daughter's situation unraveled shortly after. 2 weeks after the contempt ruling, she violated the injunction again. This time, the judge imposed daily fines until she complied fully. She's now working at an auto parts store, $16 an hour. Karma doesn't always come fast, but when it does, it's thorough. My relationship with my son, the one who believed me, has deepened in ways I never expected. We talk almost daily now. He asks how I'm really doing. I tell him the truth. I'm not angry anymore. I'm sad. Sad that my marriage was built on convenience instead of loyalty. Sad that the people closest to me saw me as a resource instead of a partner. Sad that I almost doubted my own mind because I trusted theirs more. That's the real damage. Not the money, not the lawsuits, the erosion of self-trust. Here's what I learned. When something feels wrong, investigate. Don't let anyone, family included, gaslight you into doubting your reality. If I'd ignored my instincts that day, I'd be sitting under a conservatorship right now. My life managed by people who thought they knew better than me. Was I ruthless? Maybe, but they tried to erase me. I didn't seek revenge. I defended myself. I live alone now, in a quiet downtown apartment. I cook my own meals. I do my own laundry. The business is thriving, up 8% this quarter. Turns out my daughter's vision had been holding us back. I'm not dating, not yet. I'm learning what peace feels like when it's not borrowed from someone else. Forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation. They made their choices. I finally get to make mine. And that freedom, quiet, hard-earned, and honest, is worth more than anything they tried to take from me. If you've stayed with me until the end, thank you. Stories like this aren't easy to tell, and they're not easy to hear, especially when the betrayal doesn't come from strangers, but from the people you built your life around. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been made to question your own reality, your own memory, or your own worth by someone who claimed to love you, you're not alone. Trust your instincts, pay attention to patterns, and never let anyone convince you that protecting yourself is cruelty. Sometimes the bravest thing a person can do isn't forgiving quickly or keeping the peace. It's drawing a line and refusing to be erased. If you've been through something similar, feel free to share your story in the comments. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear right now. And if you found this story meaningful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. It helps these stories reach people who need them. I'll see you in the next video. And in the meantime, take care of yourself.